What up, you guys? My name is Rich. I run Feral Publication, an alternative media publishing company, predominantly focusing on zines, but we'll be dabbling in other nefarious things moving forward. This is the new equipment. Today, though, I want to talk about alternative media, narrative distribution, and what I see moving forward for any publisher of any kind, and the power of publishing. There is a need for alternative media for independent publishers, especially in a time like the one we're walking into, where you know and you can feel that there is a dominant theory and ideology that is being kind of coerced onto a whole group of other people. And there's a lot of omissions in the discussion, as well as marginalized groups almost being excluded, if not completely erased. So censorship is nothing new. A long time ago, the Comics Code Authority, even with romance comics, there was a censorship. And this is a prime example of what I think is going to happen moving forward. Comic Code Authority, when it came to romance comics, had it in writing that it had to reinforce patriarchy. Women had to have children, women had to be married. If they were married, they had to be happily married. No matter what occurred, divorce was not on the table. Same-sex couplings was not allowed to be represented in any shape or form. And you couldn't have a woman that openly discussed not wanting to be married, not wanting to have kids. That was not allowed through the Comics Code Authority. And even in more recent times, when it comes to comic books, you can see the Washington Post cartoonist who quit over her comic strip that basically poked fun of all these tech billionaires throwing money at Trump's feet. So shout out to the homie Lalo on the other strip that I showed you, because he's the one that kind of informed me, because I follow him on Instagram, and you should as well. And then you even see, even with the means of distribution of information, right? Them limiting TikTok is also a form of censorship. It's a way of limiting the way that we communicate with each other, right? They're closing channels because those channels aren't functioning for them. And when I say them, I do mean people that are part of the elite, people that attain power, maintain the status quo in the way that we've understood it for as long as we have. Even with the TikTok ban, we're beginning to limit this channel of communication, this flow of information, because this flow wasn't working for them the way they saw fit. This idea of national security and all these things, a lot of these social media apps aren't protecting us, right? So Robert Reich even had a very, very funny quote that I saw on YouTube. It says, "So it's dangerous for China to have the ability to access our data and manipulate us via social media apps, but it's okay for America's billionaires to have the ability to access our data and manipulate us via social media apps. Do I have that right?" And that's the point. They said the quiet part out loud. They basically alluded that a lot of these social media apps are working with the United States government. They are bending to the will and needs of the American government. But this one here isn't, because it's not beholden to the American government. And that there is the problem. Of course, never mind that you have tech billionaires, Elon Musk, who owns X, as well as Mark Zuckerberg that owns Facebook and Instagram, that definitely wasn't happy with the fact that this other social media app was favored by a large population, and obviously they put money behind it to get rid of it, because when you can't compete, what else can you do but cry about it to somebody, right? To basically take away your competition, which is what's occurring in America. That's what a protectionist economy really is. What does censorship really do other than create sheep mentality? Right? Other than create really weak-minded people who have no critical thinking skills, people that don't know how to question authority. And that's dangerous moving forward. That's always been dangerous, right? Because the centralization of power can only exist if there is no outside structures challenging that power. And that's where alternative media comes in. That's where Feral Publication comes in. That's why owning the means of production really matters. And that's the power of zines, and that's the power of the DIY culture. And that's why moving forward, it's very important that everyone really gravitate to this idea of print it yourself, share it yourself. Some of my favorite zines were basically zines that were photocopy bootlegs of books that were too expensive for me to buy from the publisher. And one of those said books was Noam Chomsky and Edward Herman's Manufacturing Consent. Now that book ultimately talks about these filters, these 5 filters that they went through. Those 5 filters were size, the ownership, and the profit structure really dictated what kind of information would be allowed to come in. The advertising as well would allow what could or couldn't happen, because if you're beholden to advertisers, then you're kind of beholden to maintaining in this bubble what you can or can't say. Something like YouTube, right, where if you do certain things, they'll take away that monetization. So a lot of YouTubers don't have the freedom that other people have because they feel beholden to that money because they live off of that. That's why, like I always tell you guys, I'm not a YouTuber. I'm a publisher that uses YouTube as a means of communicating with my audience. Sourcing. A lot of times the sources that people use are like government sources and corporate sources, and that doesn't make sense. How do you challenge the power structures if you're using the power structures as ultimately your reference? Like, you have to find ways of finding information outside of it, but usually the people that have money are the only ones that will fund this kind of journalism, and they're not going to fund a journalist to figure out dirt on themselves. That would be counterintuitive to any business. The other one is just like flack and resistance and like being ostracized and attacked and you know, villainized for the information that you put out, right? So like in this instance, I think of my Jesus the Asshole comic that like people kept red flagging it on Etsy. They were saying it was hate speech, and like no one ever read it. And the people that did read it, I had a priest that read it once, and he told me that he didn't, when he picked it up, he assumed that it was hate speech, and when he read it, he realized that it was an honest conversation that I was having with myself about religion and Christianity and the way I perceived it. And he, you know, he told me in an email, he was like, you know, I misunderstood it just because your title. And he even told me like, you should probably change the title. But I don't think I should change the title. And I don't think that we need to become more meek and more quiet. I think that we need to take up more space, and we need to just have this presence about us where you can't just erase us. You know, we're going to be everywhere. So that's kind of the 5 filters that they use to push out, you know, dissenting voices and marginalized groups out of the conversation. But that's only if you're using mainstream channels. And that's why, like, going back to it, moving forward, zines and just DIY culture is going to be so big, because it's how we're going to build what we want to see inside of the structure of what is. My photocopier put in work, homie, and publishing zines is something that is low entry and everyone can do. And don't get me wrong, like, for publication is still gonna be publishing hella zines. So to begin with, zines are from the DIY and underground culture. Photocopy zines are inherently DIY and often associated with underground or counterculture movements. This guerrilla nature makes them less susceptible to traditional forms of censorship. They can be easily produced and distributed without going through mainstream publishing channels, making them harder to control. So in Alternative Media, Alternative What, by Lorenzo Vargas, we are basically understanding what alternative media companies are and what they should be doing, and Feral Publication really, you know, does these things, and I want to share it with you guys. So one of the main points is that alternative media should basically give a space for the other to represent themselves. Definitely something that Feral Publication is all about. And the second thing is that alternative media as an opportunity to challenge established media practices which are seen as common sense. And that's the other side of it, right? Because there's this concept of narrative distribution, which the article also gets into, which is the idea that if you limit the distribution of information, if you limit the way people can or cannot talk, right, you're basically censoring them and creating a form of oppression. And so through Feral Publication, the idea is that I am going to empower marginalized voices to tell firsthand accounts, to build community and culture through their art, right? Telling stories and creating characters that empower their own unique community and their own unique identifications, so that we get different perspectives. We all learn from each other. We pull our information and knowledge to just have a better experiences as humans. And then on top of that, also to try to build this model that people can then replicate. Because like I said, one of the growing fears for me is the centralization of power, centralization of information. Anytime something is centralized, guess what? Monopolies are bad. Monopoly of power, of wealth, of information, of whatever it may be. And that is something that I don't want to see occur. So like, this is not a competition between me and other publishers. This is me trying to figure out what is the system that can work, so that way they can reinterpret what I've done and build their company that'll publish something specifically about their community, their culture. I know this video has been kind of long-winded and it may seem a little chaotic at times, But ultimately, I just want you guys to remember that the media as it exists currently and for the past has been a tool to reinforce the common thought of the day. And that's why alternative media is important, because we break that up and really get people to look at different perspectives. And the centralization of anything is bad, and the centralization of information, of thoughts, of ideas, that's very dangerous, and it's something that we shouldn't allow. And Feral Publication is one of those publishing companies that I hope you guys can see as what you can do. I hope you make your own zines. I hope you buy equipment to do the next things that I'm going to be doing moving forward, and really find a way of building something that's sustainable. I think that's how we're going to lead to a bigger impact on the world. That's how we're going to impact change, is by building sustainable institutions that then outlive us or people can replicate, right? And that's kind of what I'm up to. Thank you for watching. As always, please like, share, and subscribe. And there will be a link in the show notes where you guys can cop merch or zines and other paraphernalia shit that I make. All right, you guys, thank you so much for watching. Lates.